Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Adelina East, founder of Transformational Healing, therapist, neuroscience researcher, and your host of this podcast, Cosmic Leadership. We have incredible guests lined up for you this year. We will be talking about all things mental health, spiritual awakening. We are even going to dive into some medical things with various guests this year and the impact that they have on our mental health and how we can work with this. I am so excited to share these incredible guests with you this year. I also just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. When we started this podcast back in 2019, it was called Light Beings and Way Showers. You can still find some old episodes on your podcast player. And I never dreamed that I would keep doing a podcast for years at a time. I didn't know that it was part of my destiny. I didn't know that it was even something that I was going to enjoy. But this podcast has taken so many different iterations since it started. And I'm really, really grateful for all of you being on this journey with me. Thank you for continuing to listen. Thank you for continuing to tell your friends about this podcast. I look at the numbers each week and I'm just so happy and so impressed. Thank you so much for being here, for listening. And thank you also for letting me know who you want to hear more from. This podcast continues to change direction based on what you all want to hear. This is an act of service for me. I love providing more information to people as much as I possibly can. I'm a researcher in my very soul. I'm learning along with all of you, and I love learning with you. So thank you again for being here. I also just wanted to announce that we are hiring. We're looking for a social media manager. We're looking for someone with a very wonderful background, someone who's done social media management before, and ideally someone who follows my work, who is into healing, who's into the intersection between neuroscience and spiritual awakening, because as you know, that's a lot of what I'm about. And if you know of anyone, please do let them know that we are looking. Everyone can send their resumes to Adelina at adelinaeast.com. We'll drop the link below as well. And as always, my name is spelled Adalina at adelinaeast, like the direction.com. I look forward to meeting you. I look forward to hearing from you and hearing your recommendations because this is such an important position and we're looking for someone who can grow with the company too. Today, we have Dr. Ellen Vora with us. Dr. Ellen Vora is an incredible human being. She recently wrote a book about anxiety, and she was so kind as to send the book over to me in advance. I love this. First of all, you all know me. I could read all day long, and I do. That's one of the wonderful things about being a researcher is I feel no guilt about taking time out of my day to read because it's research. It's related to what I do. And the more research I do, the more I can serve others as well. So I dove into her book head first. It is so impressive. I always love it when someone takes a more holistic approach to mental health. As you know, I believe that if you need medication, take medication. I will not in any way denigrate that. I've changed my opinion on that actually over the last few years, and with more and more working with people one-on-one therapeutically. As some of you know, my background was with working with people overseas for really large non-governmental organizations and the UN. And medication was just not a part of that for obvious reasons. So there was somewhat of a change of beat when I started working here in the US 6 years ago or so, because I do think our lives are different and I think we have different needs. Again, no shade on medications, but I do love it when a psychiatrist starts with holistic approaches to problems and doesn't immediately start throwing in the medications because sometimes we don't even know what's going on. We don't know that it is cross wiring in our brain, right? So we need to try different things. So, Dr. Ellen Vora and I talk about different things that we've tried. We talk about different things that you can try. She shares her best tips for anxiety. And she also talks about the physical manifestation of anxiety, which I think when you hear about it, you will realize that half the time that you're anxious, or maybe even more than half, you're actually not anxious about anything. It's a physical thing that's signaling your brain to make you start ruminating and thinking about what could I be anxious about? Oh, I must be anxious about this or this or this, when actually those things might not be even bothering you that much. It may be a physical manifestation of anxiety. So today we get to learn more about that with Dr. Ellen Vora. And my big takeaway from our conversation was about caffeine. So just because I have a neuroscience background does not mean that I remember everything I've ever read, and it does not mean that I can pinpoint things that are going on with me. I'm sure all of you healers out there will understand this. We need other people sometimes to point things out to us. So I learned today from Dr. Ellen Vora that caffeine has a half-life. So if you drink a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock, it's kind of like you're drinking a half a cup of coffee at 10 p.m. I think the time she mentioned was 7 hours. So I decided after our conversation to cut out my afternoon cups of tea. Yeah, it's been real. But I will say that I have never slept better. And I've been struggling with sleep for years. And so I am so incredibly grateful to Dr. Ellen Vora for reminding me of something that I probably read in a textbook years ago and don't remember, which is that caffeine has a half-life. So she has forever changed my sleep. I know that she will forever change your lives. I can't wait to share her with you today. So stay tuned for more with Dr. Ellen Vora. I am so delighted to share with you that I am opening back up my multidimensional mentorship program. We have seen graduates go on to start their own businesses with their intuitive gifts, such as channeling, healing, tarot card reading, astrology, human design, chef, also, so many other beautiful professions that are healing the world and making it into the better place where we all want to be. If you are struggling, if you're trying to figure out what your life purpose is, check out my multidimensional mentorship program. I am so excited to work with people who are ready for change, who are ready to dive into their intuitive gifts and see exactly what they're ready to do here on this planet at this time. We will put the link below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Cosmic Leadership. As always, I'm so happy to have you here. And today we get to have this incredible, incredible soul join us. She is a soul sister for all of us because she works on helping people with anxiety. So, Dr. Ellen Vora, MD, is a holistic psychiatrist, acupuncturist, and yoga teacher. She takes a functional medicine approach to mental health, considering the whole person and addressing imbalance at the root. Dr. Vora received her BA from Yale University and her MD from Columbia University. No big deal. And she is board certified in psychiatry and integrative holistic medicine. She lives in New York City with her husband and daughter. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Vora.
Adelina, thank you so much for having me here.
So we have so much to cover today, and I'm so excited to dive right in. But can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to this work on anxiety? What was the moment when you realized there was a root cause and you needed to get to it?
Mm. I've been taking a root cause approach to all mental health conditions for some time now. So, really, what brought me to writing about anxiety in particular was that the patterns weren't lost on me. I was
Mhm.
noticing that everyone coming into my office, they were struggling with anxiety. And I saw the severity of the need and how big this issue is right now. But I also really enjoy treating anxiety. It's a little different than other conditions that I treat. Some things are a little harder, more like roll up your sleeves, take a deep breath, let's do this. But with
Yeah.
anxiety, it's a delight, I find, because there's a lot of low hanging fruit. There are quick wins to be had. And I love introducing people, opening their eyes to little diet and lifestyle shifts that we can make that have a biologic plausible reason for why they work. They make a big difference. And then you've decreased a very significant amount of human suffering relatively readily.
Oh, that's such great news. I know I can speak for so many of our listeners when I say that I think all of us at some point in time have experienced anxiety, maybe to varying degrees. But I know that for myself, it's something that I struggled with for many years. So, what I found, and don't worry, everybody, I will get to her diet and lifestyle adjustments that you can make. I know we're all wondering, but I do want to know first more about anxiety from a scientific perspective because as we talked about before, I'm a neuroscientist and I love diving into the science of things. I know a lot of our listeners do as well. But anxiety is a little different. Could you walk us through the physical part of anxiety? I think that was one of the greatest takeaways from your book. She has a new book out, everybody. We will drop the link below here. But in this book, she talks so much about how it is a physical thing as well. Can you share a little bit more about that with us?
The physical basis for anxiety, it's more than one thing. And so sometimes what we're describing as anxiety is the subjective experience that's has as its root a stress response in the body.
Yeah.
So when our body releases stress hormones like cortisol or adrenaline, that can create the subjective experience of I'm afraid about the future, I'm ruminating, I'm stuck in worries about potential negative consequences. My body is tense. I can't relax. I can't take a deep breath. Sometimes what we're talking about with anxiety has a lot more to do with how the limbic system is operating. And that's where the amygdala, in particular, can almost be stuck with its foot on the gas pedal. And its job, in many ways, is to be surveying the landscape for threat, for potential threats. And but it's an instrument and it has sensitivity gauge.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when there's trauma, this will impact and adjust the sensitivity gauge. And so some of us are walking through our lives with our amygdalas stuck in a state of hyperarousal, seeing
Mm.
everything and perceiving so many things as a threat, whether or not they actually are.
Absolutely. And this is something that I've talked about so much in my courses too, is this limbic system hyperarousal. So one of the things we know is that trauma can be a big part of this, right? We can go through a major trauma in our lives and our limbic system kind of gets stuck there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the what I've learned, and I'm so excited to hear about what you've learned as well. What I've learned is that there are lots of different ways to do this. But I love the idea of retraining your brain. So the work that I do is called transformational healing, and we go through a very specific and scientific process to retrain our brains out of that stuck fight or flight. What else could we be doing? What else could we
So
be doing?
I'll be the first to admit when it comes to retraining the brain, I refer out. I send people to
Yeah.
do work with EMDR practitioners and somatic experiencing therapists. I
Yeah.
point them towards DNRS or dynamic neural retraining
Yeah.
system and all of these kinds of programs to really reprogram at the level of the limbic system. What
Mhm.
I specialize in and where I think I have something unique to offer patients is really around preventing anxiety from happening in the first place. And
Ooh, share with us more about that.
so it's really about recognizing the physical root causes of our stress responses.
Okay.
And we're very caught up in the idea that our anxiety is related to our stressors and our worries and our problems. And, in cognitive behavioral therapy, we might start to recognize, it's our cognitive distortions and it's our self-reinforcing behavioral patterns that are also contributing to anxiety. And I think that's all valid. But I think we're missing a big part of what's at the root of our anxiety, which are aspects of our modern lives that pinball our physiology every which way. They trip our body into a stress response. And then we experience that stress response as anxiety. But the root of that stress response is not actually our problems. It's a blood sugar crash, it's
Mhm.
a hangover, it's excessively strong coffee. it's these aspects of modern life that are very common. We wouldn't think twice about it, but
Yeah.
they are creating unnecessary stress responses in our body that we are then experiencing as anxiety.
Okay. So can you kind of share with it, because this is something I'm very guilty of, is the very strong coffee one. Nothing makes me happier in the morning than like an incredible. I have a French press and I'm very snobby about it. And I love my extremely strong cup of coffee. So tell us what happens body-wise when we indulge in that.
I'm not here to shame coffee, and I don't think
I
there is
know, I
anything.
know.
there,
I didn't feel shamed for a second. I didn't feel shamed for a second. I'm just so curious what's happening when I do that.
Yeah, and I don't think of it as an inherently bad substance.
Yeah.
Coffee contains magnesium, antioxidants. It's associated with decreased rates of type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease. There's a lot that's actually very good about this substance. Tea can contain its polyphenols and antioxidants, and there's so many positives. I do think we just need to recognize that there's a long half life. So the half
Mhm.
life, or how long it takes our liver to metabolize the caffeine, is about 5 to 7 hours, which has implications for the fact of when we consume caffeine will be impacting our sleep quality, because there's a big
Yeah.
difference between having a cup of coffee first thing in the morning, giving your body a chance to metabolize most of that caffeine before bedtime, versus having a cup of coffee at 3 p.m., where we're effectively having half of a cup of coffee at 9 p.m. And even if we were,
Yeah.
if we struggled with sleep, we wouldn't do that. But inadvertently, we're doing that. And I think with caffeine, we also just have to recognize there's a lot of bio individuality. And one person might be a rapid metabolizer of caffeine. Maybe for them, the half life is more like 5 hours. Maybe for them, they can have their afternoon coffee and it's not impacting their stress response quite so potently. But some of
Mhm.
us are sensitive to caffeine, we're slow metabolizers. And
Yeah.
for us, it's going to be more likely that it's creating jitteriness and amping up our stress response. And I will say,
Okay.
and I take this as, I am someone with an on again, off again love affair with coffee, but I have come to realize that we give it credit for solving a problem that it originally caused, which is to
That's true.
say, in the morning we wake up in caffeine withdrawal. And what feels good better than scratching the itch of withdrawal with the withdrawn substance itself? So we think, coffee, you're my salvation, you're my one true
Yeah.
friend in the world, but it's really just solving a problem it created.
That's so true. That's so true. And I do sometimes feel like, "Oh, you're my one true friend in the world. I'm gonna be so much more productive today if I just have a second cup."
Mm.
But if we have that second cup at 3, so because of the half-life, it's like we had this half of the second cup at 9 PM. 9 PM. Wow. So even if you don't struggle with sleep, just having that second cup at 3 PM could cause you to struggle with sleep, and then also it sends your body even at 9 PM into, like, the palpitations and all of that anxiety stuff?
Right. I mean, a big part of what it does, it actually doesn't create energy. It
Yeah.
it helps us secrete cortisol, our stress hormone, which is a form of feeling alert and awake, but it comes with a little edginess.
Yeah.
But then it basically blocks our brain's ability to hear adenosine, which helps us feel sedated and tired. So, that's, I think we've all had this experience of we're actually exhausted, but we've had a
Yeah.
little bit too much caffeine or we had it too late in the day. We lie
Mhm.
in bed so exhausted it hurts, but so unable to fall asleep. And I think that's the adenosine effect, where it's like our brain isn't able to hear the signal that it's tired.
For sure. And then some of us also then have to take herbs or different things to try to bring on the sleep.
So many of us live modern lives with that tail chase of I
Yeah.
take one drug to wake me up in the morning, I take another drug to help me sleep at night. Sometimes I think it's a more elegant solution to just kind of cut it off at the root and not have the drug that makes us excessively alert in the evening.
That sounds excellent, but how to do that? That is the
Well,
question.
really important PSA on that is that in the very small chance that I've influenced anyone to reconsider their caffeine consumption, which I recognize is a long shot, you go gradually. And this is an important PSA because it's a real drug, it has a real withdrawal, and we'll get irritable and fatigued and headachy. We're not happy campers in caffeine withdrawal. So you go very
Mhm.
gradually. When I finally tapered off of caffeine, I did it to the tune of like over a few months, where it was from multiple cups of coffee to one, to half calf, to black tea, to green tea. And by the end, I was just having a few sips of green tea in the morning to stave off the headache, but to
Mhm.
help titrate myself off of that caffeine dependence. So I do think that's a
Wow.
good way to do it. And that way it's a more sustainable approach. And what you find in the end is you're the same person. You're
Yeah.
it's like when they recentered the SATs. You're the same person with the same energy, with the same ability to function. You've just cleared out the dependence on that substance.
Yeah. I mean, I have had times of life where I've completely weaned off of caffeine. So I know that I can do it. I have to do it every couple of months. I take something called low dose immunotherapy for my multiple medical conditions, and that's been so helpful. But I do have to taper down and get off of caffeine when I'm taking one of those for the next 4 days.
Yeah.
But I taper much more quickly than you. And probably I should try to do it a little more slowly for the health of my brain. Um, but I do think that our brains are really magical, magical organs. And I know that mine is so accustomed to adapting that I just kind of put a lot of pressure on it to adapt all the time. But that can also lead to different kinds of anxiety as well, right? Then the anxiety can become like, okay, maybe I should not try going back on caffeine. Maybe I should stay off forever. Then it just gives you a whole new host of things to be anxious about.
I don't know. I think it's really individual. And you could make an argument that constantly asking our brains to adapt to this and adapt to that is anxiety provoking. I think you could also make an argument that it has sort of a hormetic effect, like hormesis,
Absolutely.
and helps us be resilient and adaptable. I'm not sure which. I would
Yeah.
say that the golden compass with all of this is dusting off that connection to ourselves. Like there's
Hmm.
no media headline or scientific evidence or, any paper that's going to tell you here's the right relationship to caffeine for your body.
Right.
It's really just actually recognizing we can listen to that internal message of, well, here's how the body feels. Here's the body
Yeah.
saying yes, here's the body saying no. And I find that that's a really nice way of navigating these choices.
Absolutely. And I think that the closer we can get to knowing and having that relationship with our bodies, the more quickly we can know when something is actually wrong, when we're having real, true anxiety, as you talk about in your book, or whether you're having false anxiety.
Yeah. Should
Can
I
you give
define
a
that concept?
yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I recognize that the term false anxiety is like kind of triggering and
Yeah.
really important to point out. It doesn't speak to like there is very real suffering in
Yeah.
false anxiety, but it speaks to the fact that it has a physiologic basis and a straightforward path out. So
Hmm.
here's the definition. In my book, I've decided that there was a more useful classification system for anxiety than what I was taught. I was trained with the DSM, the Diagnostic
Hmm. Me too.
Statistical Manual of Mental Diseases, and we're
Yep.
taught to say anxiety is GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, or it's panic disorder with or without agoraphobia, or OCD, and
Hmm.
so on and so forth. And I know we need to standardize our diagnoses for the purpose of medical research. I know we need to gatekeep if there's an invasive intervention involved. We need to say, this is real clinical anxiety, and therefore you should take a medication. This is not, and therefore you shouldn't. But none of that was steering management in a useful way in my practice. I'm not typically, sorry, I'm not typically prescribing medication. I'm using diet and lifestyle strategies. So there's nothing there to gatekeep. And what I
Hmm.
realized a more meaningful classification system was to divide anxiety into two types, what I call false anxiety or avoidable anxiety, and what I
Hmm.
call true anxiety or purposeful anxiety, where false anxiety is what happens when something on the level of the physical body has tipped us into a stress response. And we then subjectively experience that as anxiety. And
Yeah.
true anxiety, on the other hand, it's not something to pathologize, it's not something to suppress. We don't get to decaf coffee our way out of true anxiety. It is it's our inner compass
Yeah.
nudging us to slow down and to pay attention to something that's out of alignment in our lives. I think true anxiety is not what's wrong with us. And in many ways, it's what's right with us when we are viscerally connected to what's not right in the world around us.
Right. And I think that's an important point too, just because whether it's whatever kind of anxiety it is, it's okay to recognize what's not right in the world around you. And perhaps what's not right is also inside of you. Maybe inside of you, you're having a whole response to caffeine that actually shows you your body doesn't like it and that you need to go off of it for a while.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And I think we've had a world for a long time now that kind of shames sensitivity.
Hmm.
And, if someone is very sensitive, we say like, don't be so sensitive.
I hate
Pull
that.
yourself together. And
Oh,
I think we've
the
got it
worst.
really, really wrong. I think it is important to
It's so wrong.
recognize human beings, omnivores in every sense of the word. It takes all types. We are diverse
Yeah.
by design. So we need less sensitive folks. I want that person to be my pilot or my surgeon. But we
Hmm.
also need the folks who can't make it through the news without crying.
Right.
They also serve a vital role. I think they're even here in a prophetic capacity. They're
Agreed.
the ones that are tapped in, and they're going to wake us all up before it's too late. They're going to be the ones to say something's really not right in this aspect of the world. And so, for those folks to recognize it's not something that's wrong with you, it is a superpower, it's a gift, and
Hmm.
it has a heavy burden.
Yeah,
It's a gift, but it's a liability in such a noisy world. But to embrace it and to really leverage that skill and to not let people shame you for it.
I agree. And I work with so many highly sensitive people, and I am a highly sensitive person. And I was shamed for it for most of my life. I was
Yeah.
always the person who was crying at commercials. And, um, sometimes when I would fall down as a child, it was not even about the getting hurt. It was just that I was scared that I had the capability to fall down, which, if you think about it, is a great metaphor for being an adult.
There you go.
Um, and so I think that we are the canaries in a gold mine. We are the ones that are sounding the alarm on climate change and all of these other things that, for me personally, provide a lot of anxiety. um, but I know that there are also people in the world who deny it's even an issue. So I think one of the most important things about that kind of anxiety anyway is for us to remember that it's okay to be the canary in the gold mine. As you were saying, it's okay to be that sensitive. We are required for this world to function, I think.
That's right. Yeah. And I don't know your health background, but you mentioned low dose immunotherapy. And that
Hmm.
makes me think of Lyme disease, where I have so
Yes.
many patients for whom, like, Lyme, I've always thought of as existing in sort of what one of my colleagues calls a Lyme trauma vortex. But
Yes.
I think Lyme is actually part of how our canaries in the modern day coal mine are harbingers. They're here with a signal. I think that chronic Lyme seems to impact sensitive folks in particular. And
Hmm.
is it here to wake us all up? Is it here to show us? Because the journeys that people go down with chronic Lyme of starting to recognize aspects of modern life that are keeping you ill, starting to recognize what is supportive of healing, that journey ends up being informative for everyone.
I
And
agree.
and I think that it's the sensitive folks who are afflicted in this way, but then develop all of these insights and gifts to share with the world at large.
Absolutely. And I could do an entire podcast on Lyme alone. But what I have found through my Lyme journey and through the Lyme journeys of many of my clients is that it doesn't come sort of out of the blue. You know how maybe you're just doing your regular life and you get a cold and it knocks you down for a week, but you're fine and there's nothing major that's happening there. There's always a major life moment I feel that's attached to Lyme. So for me, it was being the canary in the coal mine that my workplace had mold, my home
Mm,
had mold. And we had to get out of those spaces. And it's a responsibility. And I think that often gets thrown by the wayside. Most people who get chronic Lyme have found themselves in some form of responsibility of like letting other people know that this environment is toxic for whatever reason. And it's not outside that's toxic. It's usually inside that's toxic. Um, and so I think it's a really important thing for people with chronic Lyme and those of us who are highly sensitive, to remember that, there's always a point to it. It's never just like, well, my life sucks for no reason. It's that alarm sounding, and then there's often an alarm sounding part in your own personal life. For me, it was time to leave my job. I had worked with the UN for many years, and it was time to leave that job for a number of reasons. And I think most people with chronic Lyme have a story similar to that. It was time to leave this relationship or this profession or whatever the case may be.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So I think I wonder if it's useful to go through a couple particularly common, but the low
Please.
hanging fruit with false
Yes.
anxiety of how people can say, like, how do I put this into practice and feel less anxious?
Yes,
Um,
let's do it.
and so, sorry. And so basically, with false anxiety, what I have my patients do is actually carry around in their bag, put it on the refrigerator, what I call a false anxiety inventory. It just
Hmm.
has a list of common root causes.
Yeah.
And it's there to cue us and to jog our memory because in the moment of peak anxiety, we're just always going to try to make sense of our anxiety from our circumstances. So we'll
Right.
be struck suddenly out of nowhere with a moment of peak anxiety.
Hmm.
And our brain, the consummate meaning maker that it is, will tell us a story and it will say, well, I'm anxious right now because that email from my boss is suggestive that I'm underperforming and that interpersonal dynamic from the seventh grade still irks me. And so we're always going to connect to that story. But what it really is a retrofitted justification. It's the brain attempting to make sense of what is first and foremost a physical sensation. And what's in fact happening, if we could omnisciently look under the hood of the body in that moment, is that we're sleep deprived, or we're in a blood sugar crash, or we had an extra cold brew coffee, or we're hungover, or we're getting our period the next day, or we're due for a dose of psychiatric medication, or we're deficient in vitamin B12. And that's creating a physiologic state of imbalance. It's generating a stress response. And then we're experiencing that as anxiety. So in those moments, it's helpful to just glance at that list. And that list can tell us, and it's not to invalidate the stories our mind tells us. You can
Right.
basically tell yourself, my stressors are real, my problems are valid,
Right.
and do I just need a snack right now?
Right.
And so it can help remind us there's an actionable thing we can do to support the anxiety in this moment. Sometimes there isn't an actual takeaway. It more just informs future decisions. Like, oh, maybe I'm more anxious right now because I'm hungover. And that might just inform future choices around alcohol consumption. Or sometimes it just helps us know this is why I'm anxious. Like you
Right.
might be getting your period the next day and you
Hmm.
feel a little bit more tender, more raw. There's no way to really fully solve the shift in our emotions when our hormones are bottoming out right before we bleed. And so just to know, like, okay, I'm feeling a peak of anxiety right now, but I know I'm getting my period tomorrow. So maybe that's why. And maybe I can just give myself some compassion and patience and draw a bath.
Right.
And another one like that is psychiatric medication, which can create interdose withdrawal or that pharmacologic nadir or low point in between two doses of medication. And sometimes I have patients who take their meds in the morning and they'll wake up panicked, racing thoughts, racing heart, and
Hmm.
they'll run with that and think, okay, I have all these reasons to be anxious. But it's probably just their brain in anticipation of the next dose.
Right.
And so they just need to take their meds, but also to ground and remind themselves it's not that things are so doom and gloom. It's that this is my brain when it's at its pharmacologic nadir of a psychoactive substance.
Right. And I won't go too hippy dippy here. But I also have found with my clients that anxiety peaks right before a major spiritual awakening moment. So, for example, if you are, I know many of our listeners here are channels and healers and all kinds of different things. If you have an anxiety peak, um, as you kind of feel something coming in, like maybe there's a new realization you're about to come to, maybe you're about to receive a new client that needs something really specific from you, that can also be a major trigger for anxiety. And it can be challenging to work with because you don't really know what's coming next. But I've found that the longer people practice their intuitive gifts and really dive into that side of things, they can start to see the patterns. Like, oh, okay, this person called me yesterday for advice about this. And then I also am seeing this come up in this other area of my life and in this other area of my life. So probably I'm about to receive a really big download from my guides. And that's why I'm so anxious and I can just calm down.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought it up. It's not something I've ever talked about on a podcast, but I do think that that kind of anxiety, for me, it connotes salience.
Hmm.
And I feel like it's necessary in the sense that it makes us reverent. We're about to go connect with our guides. We're about to get
Yeah.
some kind of divine download. We're about to go be in the presence of the divine. We
Yeah.
shouldn't casually sort of, waltz up to that. To we need something that drops us to our knees a bit. We need to enter that temple with reverence, that we're in proximity to the sacred. And so
Absolutely.
it needs to feel intense on some level. And I think that's by design.
I agree. And I think what's worked best for me and for a lot of my clients in those moments when you kind of recognize your patterning and you can see that you're about to receive one of those big downloads, that's a time for rest because whatever's going to come through is going to challenge your physical body. You know, we're divine beings in physical form. So it will have an impact on your physical body. So if you can drop into rest in whatever way that means for you, even if you're a mom of four and you're super busy, if you can try to go to bed like 15 minutes earlier that night, even that little bit will help reduce the anxiety somewhat.
I agree completely. And I think that, I go into this a little bit in my book. I call it the sensitive person's checklist. And it's
Hmm.
basically recognizing, if you are one of these canaries in the modern day coal mine, um, the average person has to brush their teeth and floss. And I think sensitive folks have a little bit of a longer daily habits list and
Oh, for sure.
grounding with nature,
Yeah.
shaking it out, earlier bedtime, all of these clearing practices to really
Mhm.
just make sure that we're taking really good care of this incredible antenna that we carry around in our vessels.
I agree. And the longer than usual daily habits list for me is probably like 4 or 5 hours, which is why I'm so very grateful and lucky to be able to do these things from home so that I can do some of those practices in between other things, other commitments.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's a really beautiful part of the book as well. So, I have one more question for you now that I know that you're more hippy dippy leaning. Um, was there a particular moment where you felt uh, like you were hearing from your guides or your intuition or whatever about writing this book?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, so much. I mean, I'm in constant conversation with guidance and intuitive hits, and in many ways, my mom in spirit form. So I had a whole journey with that with this book. And part of it, I'd always thrown around the idea of writing a book, and I felt like I had a unique perspective in mental health. And in many ways, there was one particular week I had someone approach me and say, have you thought about writing a book? I would love to like be your collaborator and work with you on it. I didn't end up working with her, but that felt like a sign. It ended up being a kind of like, oh, that's one approach to do this. Okay, that lowers the barrier of entry a little bit. I had someone
Yeah.
else approach me and say, does anybody represent you? Do you have a literary agent? I was like, no, I don't even know how this process works. And I
Yeah.
didn't end up working with her either, but that helped me say, like, okay, let me do this process properly. Let me find the right agent. And then it culminated in I was having a treatment with my acupuncturist, and she's a bit of a medium.
Hmm.
And she said, I have a message from your mom who is on the other side.
Yeah.
And my mom was a librarian. And apparently
Yay.
she said to me, it's time for you to stop reading books and start writing books. And you don't argue with that.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of helped me start. And then throughout, I mean, the process really had to be a constant relationship to guidance to make sure that I'm writing the book that's going to be most useful for people, that's actually going to be what this world needs, what needs to be birthed through me. And so, I've felt very supported by guides throughout the process. And it's a thrill. It's a thrill to feel that, in the Elizabeth Gilbert big magic sense, like that
Mm-hmm.
there is a creative project that wants to be birthed, wants to be
Yeah.
made manifest. And when you get the call and you feel like, someone is presenting you with the mission and you can choose to accept it or decline it, I find it thrilling to navigate those choices and say, yeah, I accept this mission. I will do this. This is fully in purpose for me.
Yay. I have to say, as I was reading the book, and which you were so generous to send over, thank you so much. As I was reading the book, I was really feeling it. I was feeling the guides in the book. And I think it's so important that you've put this work out there because I'm not going to speak for everyone because that's dangerous. Let me speak only for myself. I have been down the road with psychiatrists, and I think that many of us have. And people who don't really spend the time getting to know you and to try to figure out what the root cause is. We've all been down that road. And so it's just so thrilling and such a gift from source, I think, to have someone like you in our corner and to have this book be brought to the light of day so that we can also help ourselves. I have a degree in neuroscience, but not everybody does. So you want ways to kind of figure out how you can, for lack of a better word, hack your own anxiety and figure it out, um, in a way that won't, or hopefully won't involve someone who doesn't know you well, who's not spending time with you, just throwing pills at you and sending you on your way.
I mean, I'm so glad you brought this up. And, you and me and so many people listening and so many people today have been down that path with the
Mhm.
field of mental health. And not that many people have an overall positive experience there. And so that's my primary message of all is I don't want people to lose hope. I don't want them to
Right.
despair. I want people to have hope. I want them to realize that even if this very limited menu of offerings that the field of mental health has presented thus far, therapy or meds, if that's
Hmm.
brought you relief, great. That's a victory. I'm not here to philosophically oppose that. I have no
Oh,
dogma in that.
absolutely.
It's
Whatever works for you.
whatever works, whatever decreases human suffering, I'm on
Yeah.
board with. It's not causing any harm, hurting anybody. I think
Yeah.
that the trouble is there are millions of people for whom the current offerings have not brought them satisfactory relief. And those folks sometimes get very demoralized with the process. And they
Hmm.
often feel like, well, I've tried everything and it didn't work for me. And the
Right.
world is telling me my mental health is a genetic chemical imbalance and that these pills fix that chemical imbalance. So if it hasn't worked for me, people think, am I
What do
stuck?
I do?
Is there no
Yeah.
hope? And so I
Right.
want those folks to know, don't despair. There's always hope. And this mountain of healing has actually many paths up. We have
Hmm.
shown people two potential paths.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's the right path. Very often it's not the right path for you. And this functional medicine or holistic approach to mental health is basically introducing you to a whole other set of paths up this mountain. And the idea with false anxiety, which I hope is like, you know, really makes a synaptic connection for some people is to recognize that mental health is it's not as simple as we've been taught to say that it's just the result of a genetic chemical imbalance. If anything, the chemical imbalance is probably a downstream effect from
Right.
all of
Agreed.
these root causes affecting our mental health upstream. But so
Hmm.
basically, to recognize that our mental health is determined by how we're sleeping and how we're feeding ourselves, how we're moving our bodies, the health of our digestive tract, whether or not we're inflamed, the balance of our hormones, all the way to our psychospiritual needs around community and feeling of purpose and of service in our lives, connecting to meaning. And this is what we actually can do to support our mental health. A lot of it's very empowering. There's not a whole lot we
Yeah.
can do about our genes, but there's so
Right.
many things we can do to support our diet and lifestyle. So I just want people to know that if they're feeling stuck and that every door has been a dead end, there are all of these other paths that they can take to support their mental health in a very evidence based scientific way. And then they can thrive in their lives.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Vora. You're so incredible. Thank you for putting this book into the world. We will drop the link below for everyone who is watching or listening.
Oh, Adelina, thank you so much for having me on your incredible podcast. And thank you for taking me into the woo woo. It's a category I particularly enjoy talking about.
Yay. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.